All right, moving on to test 2. This is the second passage, 11 through 21. Starting off here with number 11. This is going to be your main idea question. Remember, you're going to probably do this one last, but we're going in order of the questions. So before you ever get to this, you've probably done all the questions, but just remember, we still, as we read, we start by reading the little blurb. So this one says this passage is adapted from Lane King, and it's titled, Can Economics Be Ethical? So this is kind of useful because this is literally the title of the passage itself. So the main idea probably has something to do with ethical economics. So anyway, when you read this question, the main purpose is probably related again to ethical economics. So when you're going through the answer choices, that's going to be helpful. Some other things that kind of stand out as you read, a couple lines here that I've kind of pinpointed that would help you understand it. It says there are different, this is a line 11 and 12 here. It says there are different views on where ethics should apply when someone makes an economic decision. So they're talking about, again, ethics and economics. So there are different viewpoints. And then they go through and talk about some of those different viewpoints. So they do that in the next couple of paragraphs here. They also, they go to yet another approach on line 45 in terms of ethics in characters. So really, as you kind of go through this, it's all about ethics and economics. So, and really kind of different ways or different viewpoints on how to look at it. So anyway, do they consider an ethical dilemma? No, they're talking about all the different viewpoints or different ways. So it's not going to be A. Does it describe a psychology study? It's not really describing a psychology study. Does it argue that the free market prohibits ethical economics? It's really not an argument anyway, so I would kind of stop right there. Does it examine? It is examining different ways of evaluating the ethics of economics. It's examining different ways. So 11 is going to be D. That's exactly what this passage is doing. Number 12 says, in the passage, the author anticipates which of the following objections to criticizing the ethics of free economics. So again, they anticipate, and that's the first thing you'd want to look for here. We're going to look for, and this is an evidence-based question. So you were looking for some sort of anticipation of objections to criticizing the ethics of free markets. So really, I'm focusing on an anticipation, saying like, if you're in an argument with somebody and before they have a chance to counteract your argument, you kind of mentions like, I know you're probably thinking this, but let me tell you something. So we're looking for one of those types of statements. So we're going to go through our evidence, starting in line 4, and we're going to see which one talks about some anticipating objections. So starting in line 4, here we go. So in line 4 says, some argue. So they are saying that what other people may say, so that's an anticipation, that because the free markets allow for personal choice, they're already ethical. So free markets, personal choice, already ethical. That is the anticipation that they're going to be making. Now, in order to save time, this is the one that you would be picking because it is doing an anticipation. So what you do is you find the one that states that. But again, remember, you go through the entire process elimination here and you check each one. But this is doing an anticipation. So once you see that, then you want to say, well, what are they saying? So again, the question is telling you they anticipate which of the following objections. So what is the objection? So free markets allow for personal choice. So you have personal choice, therefore they're ethical. So we want to see what answer choice says that. So when you go through your answers, and by the way, the evidence is going to be A for this one. You got to check all of them. So it says Smith's association of free markets with ethical behavior still applies today. No. And again, we're looking at free markets are already, ethical. So free markets are the best way to generate high profits. They're not saying that. Free markets are ethical. So I like this because they are made possible by devalued currency. they're not saying that. D says free markets are ethical because they enable individuals to make choices. That is exactly what answer choice A is saying. So number 12 is going to be D. So that's going to be 12 and it's going to be 13. Number 14 says, as used in line 6, embraced most nearly means. So we are just going to go to line 6, maybe a few lines before, maybe a few lines after, get the context, and we're going to see what as an alternate set of words we can use for this one. So line 6, and I'm going to start with that same sentence at the start of the paragraph. It's probably a good spot here. So it says, some argue that because free markets allow for personal choice, they are already ethical. Others have accepted the ethical critique and embraced corporate social responsibility. So they've accepted the ethical critique and, I would say at this point, just accepted. I'm thinking something where you just allow this to happen. You're okay with it. You fully let it sink in that this is how you feel. So I'm looking for an answer choice that kind of matches that. It's not lovingly held. That's another meaning for the word embrace. Readily adopted is kind of what I was thinking here. You just kind of you've accepted it, and in a good way. It's not like you've accepted it because you had to. You really feel that it's right, so you've readily adopted it. Adopt something is to just kind of accept it and bring it in. Eagerly hugged. Again, hugged, embrace. This is the wrong type of embrace. Reluctantly used. And again, the key is it's not really reluctant here. The way it's put in is you've embraced it in a good way. So D is going to be wrong, and 14 is going to be B. So that's 14. 15 says the main purpose. Remember, the main purpose is not the main purpose of the passage. We're in the middle of this question set. It's the main purpose of the 5th paragraph. So we have to read the 5th paragraph, figure out what is the main purpose, and see what we get here. So 45 through 56, again, you would have read all the way up, all these lines leading up to this. So all this would have been read. That might give you some good context. So some context we may have to help you answer this is they started talking about the different views where ethics should apply. Then they said consider Adam Smith, and they kind of went through one method. And then they talked about, the next paragraph, Aristotle said ethics, so they talked about another method. And then they come into this paragraph and says there is yet another approach. So we've already gone through 2 approaches. This is actually the 3rd one. This is why, again, they're telling you to read this paragraph, but you have to read all the lines before that. So instead of rooting ethics in character or the consequence, we can focus on our actions themselves, and they're talking about this new approach. From this perspective, some things are right, some are wrong. We should buy fair trade goods. And again, instead of rooting ethics, character, consequences, we can focus on our actions themselves. And they talk about some of these actions. We shouldn't tell lies in advertisements. Ethics becomes a list of commandments, a catalog of do's and don'ts. When a finance official refuses to devalue a currency because they have promised not to, promised, they are defining ethics this way. So according to this approach, devaluation can still be bad, even if it would make everybody better off. Okay, so in this one, they're talking about that 3rd approach of ethical economics, about just doing the right thing. So then we want to find an answer choice that matches that. Does it develop a counter-argument? No, it's not. Does it provide support for the idea that ethics is about character? This is, again, just mentioning a new method, so it's not providing support. Ethics is about character, according to this paragraph, but you're not providing support for the idea necessarily. But I would keep that as an option because that is kind of close, it seems like. Does it describe a 3rd approach to defining ethical economics? Yes, it does. That is the answer. Does it illustrate that one's actions are a result of one's character? No, it does not. So again, if you're stuck between these two, C is going to be way more definitely correct because it is a 3rd approach and it is about defining ethical economics, so that's going to be C. Number 16 says, as used in line 58, clashes most nearly means. So we're going to go ahead and see what clashes means in context. So now line 58. Here we go. So here we go. I'm going to start at the beginning of this paragraph with the word many. Many moral dilemmas arise when these three versions, and this is another thing that might help you when you're reading the next question. If you are stuck between B and C, maybe you come back to it, because you say, oh, they are three versions. So that's another little clue there for you. But anyway, many moral dilemmas arise when these three versions pull in different directions, but clashes are inevitable. So I'm thinking conflict, something like that, some arguments. So conflicts, arguments, something of that nature seems to kind of fit this sentence. So I'm just going to go ahead and check that. It seems pretty clear to me. So conflict matches. Mismatches, no. Collisions, no. Brawls, well, that's a little strong. They're not just going to fist fight or anything. They just have disagreements. So A would be your answer for number 16. Conflict/disagreement, something like that. So that's 16. 17 says, which choice best supports the author's claim that there is common ground shared by the different approaches to ethics described in the passage. So we want to find a piece of evidence that describes that there is a common ground shared by these approaches. So you're going to go through all the lines and look to see which one matches. To save us time, let's look at the right answer, 59 through 64, and see how it does that. So here we go. Take fair trade coffee. Coffee that is sold with certification that indicates the farmers and workers who produced it were paid a fair wage, for example. Buying it might have good consequences, be virtuous, and also be the right way to act in a flawed market. Now, when you read the passage, you'll realize it might have good consequences, be virtuous, and also be the right way to act in a flawed market. These represents the three methods, ethical economics, that were mentioned in this passage. So they're mentioning all three through an example. So they're showing how they can all work together. So again, that's another reason why we need to read all this stuff even though it's not initially marked. You have to read everything because the context is still required for you to answer these questions. So that one is why it works. It mentions all three, or examples of all three pieces of ethics, ethical economics, and that's why C is going to be your answer for number 17. But again, you read through all three of them, just describing why C is actually correct. Number 18 says the main idea of the final paragraph. So pretty straightforward. What's the main idea of that final paragraph? So again, we're going to read this whole paragraph and just try to figure out again what's that main idea. So as you read, just pay attention to some of the key words I'm going to highlight as I go. So these human quirks mean we can never make purely rational decisions. A new wave of behavioral economics. So this is like a new wave, so something new, aided by neuroscientists, is trying to understand our psychology, both alone and in groups, so they can anticipate our decisions in the marketplace more accurately. But psychology can also help us understand why we react in disgust at economic injustice or accept moral law as universal, which means that the relatively new science of human behavior might also define ethics for us. Ethical economics would then emerge from one of the least likely places, economists themselves. So it seems like as I read this, they're talking about the psychology, behavioral economics, and the psychology behind it. So I'm kind of getting into that psychological aspect. So I would say the main idea has to do with that. So the main idea has something to do with the psychology of the ethical economics. So human quirks make it difficult to predict people's ethical decisions accurately. I don't think it was really talking about that. It's talking about psychology. People universally react with disgust when faced with economic injustice. While this was mentioned in the paragraph, it's not the main idea, so it's not going to be B. Is it about understanding human psychology may help to define ethics and economics. That one matches. So that one's good. D says economists themselves will be responsible for reforming the free market. They did mention that, but there's nothing here about psychology, and that was a big part of that paragraph. So C is going to be a better answer for number 18. And then we are on to the graphs. So 19 says data in the graph about per pound coffee profits in Tanzania most strongly support which of the following statements. So this one isn't mentioning anything about the passage, which means we shouldn't have to read it. So let's, again, just look at this. Data in the graph about per pound coffee profits in Tanzania support which of the following statements. So before I read the statements, I need to know what it's saying about per pound coffee profits in Tanzania. So go to the graph, per pound coffee profits, and again, this is right up here. We read that first, and that just kind of lets us know, again, what this, obviously you have to understand how to read this chart, and then we can focus on what the question's asking. And really what it's showing, when you look, we have a very big gap here. When you're looking at these two charts, it looks like the fair trade coffee, and this is all in Tanzania, by the way, and obviously the amount per pound and all that stuff, but it looks like we're making a lot more profit with fair trade coffee on a consistent basis. So I want a statement that says that we're making more money with fair trade coffee as we are with regular coffee. So I'm going to look at my answer choice and see which one says that. So fair trade coffee consistently earn greater profits than regular coffee earned. I think that's pretty straightforward. So that's going to be our answer just to save us time. You would check each one just to make sure, but that's exactly what it's doing. So 19 is going to be A. And then 20, data in the graph. So we're looking at the data in the graph indicate that the greatest difference between per pound profits for fair trade and those from regular coffee occurred during which period. So we want to see when that biggest gap occurred, so the greatest difference. So when you look at all these and you want to see when the greatest difference is going to be between these 2 points. So I'm looking at the points. They said 2000 to 2002. So when you're looking at these, I'm kind of looking at this gap here. So that's going to be answer choice A. 2002 to 2004. You can kind of see B, that's going to be a bigger gap. 2004 to 2005 is this gap right here. And 2006 to 2008. Actually, I'd kind of come up there. And if you kind of look, the biggest gap is going to be, because it goes down the farthest, is going to be B. It goes down farther than any of the other ones do. That means there's a bigger difference. So B, which is 2002 to 2004, is going to be your answer for number 20. All right, now on to 21. It says data in the graph provide most direct support for which idea in the passage. Now, just make sure they do mention the passage here, but what that doesn't mean is that you really need to go back and read it, because they're telling you that they're going to be listing 4 ideas that were already in the passage. So we don't have to guess if they are or not. So which of these match the data in the graph? So remember, the data in the graph is really kind of showing that fair trade coffee is going to perform better or be more profitable than regular coffee. So fair trade versus regular. So when you look at the answers, this all has to do with ethical economics. And fair trade coffee was a construct of ethical economics. So it's showing that ethical economics is a good thing. So when you look at the answer choices, you want to see something that kind of comes close to matching that. So A says acting on empathy can be counterproductive. First off, this doesn't mention the ethical economics. Maybe the one thing about empathy is part of one of the methods of ethical economics, but it's not really what this answer should be anyway. Ethical economics is mentioning ethical economics, so that's good. Is defined by character, and that's really has nothing to do with the actual chart itself, so that's not good. Ethical economics for C is still possible. So this is kind of showing that it could work in a way. When you say it's possible, it means it could work, so that's good. And then D says people fear losses more than they hope for gains. That doesn't really match the graph either at all. So the only answer choice that would fit here for number 21 is C, and that is the second passage from test 2.